I had heard rumors about a Minecraft save file named Honora that was supposed to hold a castle somebody made named Suicide Towers. The story goes that this castle or manor was supposed to be a place that everybody went to when they wanted to commit suicide. Suicide Towers was said to be built like a castle, with long corridors that seemed to go on forever, dark and gloomy hallways, and chambers holding multiple ways that the player could kill his character on the game. Somehow or another, I was able to get my hands on the Honora Minecraft save file through ways I prefer not to talk about, and started to play it. I'll admit that I was pretty nervous before playing, as I waited and waited for the game to finish loading. It was an unusually long wait, and it seemed like the game was never going to finish loading. Moreover, I just waited and waited, with my hands sweating on the controller. I must have waited for exactly 5 minutes before I decided that, okay, I don't think this game's going to load. And so I got up out of my chair and attempted to restart the game. Just as soon as I got up though, the game finished loading, as I was suddenly greeted with Minecraft's familiar endless plains, the way the game looked when you checked the box to get flat land. I used the fly button in order to better scour the land over great distances in the fastest sort of time, but I still didn't see anything. I scoured the land until finally I saw an ominous structure off in the distance. As I flew over to it, a strange thing happened. The closer I got to the structure, the more I began to feel this unexplainable feeling of sorrow or dread, almost like an I don't feel like playing anymore feeling, mixed in with a constant feeling that somebody was in the room with me, watching me play. The game was set in the daytime, but when I finally reached the structure, which was huge, by the way, the front entrance which led into it was so dark that it was like it didn't matter whether it was daytime in the game or not. The entrance, along with the whole structure, was built like some kind of a giant Gothic castle. Pillars stood at the sides of it, and on the lower edge of the pillar, right when you walk in, I could faintly read out the words on the sign, Suicide Towers. I went inside the castle and was immediately greeted with the darkness inside. There was a string of redstone torchlights all around the castle, but the heaviness of the sheer dark corners and walls seemed to blend into each other so morbidly that you could barely see the avatar you were playing as. There was also a terrible feeling that I kept getting. I kept feeling like if I remained idle for too long in the game and just stared into the dark corners of the castle, a face was going to appear and scare me half to death. I could see into a hallway as I kept walking forward, the redstone torchlights helping just a little for me to be able to actually see where I was going. The hallway seemed to go on and on forever. It was almost inhuman how long it went on for as I followed the redstone torchlights. I noticed that the floors were in a checkered pattern, only faintly visible out of the darkness in the castle. The 2 bricks used were endstone and black wool. The front interior of the castle seemed to have the same pattern as well. When I finally reached the end of the hallway, however, further into the room, the floor's pattern eerily changed. The orderly checkered pattern had now become this random mix and jumble of the same 2 patterns, the endstone disorganized out of place along with the black wool, and was not even in a pattern form anymore. As I moved the camera angle to try and look up at the ceiling was so dark that it was impossible to see it. Though the lighting in the room was really, really poor, I was able to make out 3 doors with signs next to them. I walked up to the door on the far right and was just faintly able to make out something written on it. "Look out," it said. As I went through the door, I was greeted with a small room and also something creepy. There are signs posted all upon the walls of the room, completely covering the room's walls. Every single one of the signs had the same writing on it, only it wasn't writing at all. They all had symbols on it that looked like a pair of wide eyes, staring back at whoever entered the room. The symbols sort of looked like 2 brackets with zeros in them for eyes, and an L used like a nose. There were 2 ladders in the room that led upstairs. I watched nervously as the signs' faces seemed to watch my every move as I climbed up the ladders and opened the trap doors. The ladders took me up into a new room. It was dark, and into the distance I saw another pair of ladders that would take me even higher into the room above me. What I also noticed was out from the left corner next to the ladders was a chair. The chair was facing the corner of the wall entirely, and as I slowly walked closer to it, I saw a signpost next to the chair with the words "Obedience" written on it. What did this mean? Was the chair in the corner some form of punishment for someone? I finally went up the ladders and went further up them until they took me up into a final room. This room was dark, just as dark as all of the other rooms, with nothing but redstone torchlights to slightly make navigation possible. I couldn't believe my eyes. As soon as I walked into the room, I saw another chair, only this time there was also a long string of fence posts traveling upward to the ceiling next to it, almost in the form of a hanging noose. It was as if somebody had once committed suicide in this very same room by hanging themselves. The room had a door with a sign next to it. I was just able to make out the words on the sign, "The Hanging Room." I opened the door and entered the room, which led me down a small hallway with another door. As I opened the door, I was greeted with a large, spacious, dark room, with wooden floorboards, redstone torchlights all over the place, and chairs, accompanied with more fence posts used as if nooses, dangling from the ceiling. I kept feeling this overwhelming feeling of dread and anger, almost like as if I regretted coming into this room, but I had no idea where the feeling was coming from. I also noticed that there were red droplets on the ground that sort of looked like blood. I navigated my way through the room. Chairs were scrawled in groups along the floor, and out of the corner of my eye, one of the nooses had something hanging from it. The sweat on my brows dripped as I went to the front of the hanging red brick to face it. There was another sign with a face on it on the brick that looked like the wide eyes from the lookout room, only this sign was different. This face looked more sinister as its eyes pierced into me like a knife cutting into my very flesh. There was something disturbing about the way this face looked at you, like it had no mercy for you whatsoever. I followed the other half of the blood to a door inside of the room. The room opened and contained a chest inside, as the blood led me right to it. I opened the chest and found the following items inside of it: 2 bones, a head, which must have represented a severed head, and an axe. This creeped me out very much as I exited the room. The room also led me down a flight of stairs. I went down the stairs, and as I did so, out of the corner of my eyes, I noticed a sign on the wall, right in the corner of the stairs. "Red Clover pushed her," the sign read in all caps. I noticed 2 more signs on the sides of the steps as I went down. One of them read, "Down the," and the other read, "Steps." I had no idea what this could mean. Did somebody do something terrible to somebody going down these stairs? I went further down the steps and saw 3 more signs on the sides of the stairs. They each read, "Cut her," "Pause," and then, "Her neck." It was very chilling after reading what I just read. What could this have meant? Somebody cut someone's paws? And then her neck? The black wool and endstone checkered pattern had returned to the floor in this wide and spacious dark room. But there was also something else. I noticed that exactly right underneath of where the signs I just read were, the pattern of the floor disrupted, and were all mumbled and jumbled from the rest of the floor, as if the signs themselves were disrupting the flow of the unity that the checkered pattern had to offer. Aside from that, the room was very spacious. There were chairs and tables spread out from each other, and there were 2 doors leading me to 2 different rooms. One of the rooms had an iron door that I had to press a button in order to access, and a sign right next to it that read, "Chamber of the Living and the Dead." The door had a very bad vibe about it, and I was really close to opening it, but then I looked at the other door. I could hear something playing in the background behind it. It almost sounded like somebody screaming, or somebody running very heavily. I could hear their shoes hitting the pavement in a very eerie way. I opened the double doors and went through. All I could hear was the noise of somebody shuffling themselves and breathing hard, like they were being chased by something. As soon as I went through the door, the loud screaming noise that sounded like somebody screaming in hell had ended abruptly, leaving me to stand stunned in silence. Immediately, I was face to face with a series of doors in a row. One of them was an iron door. There was a lever next to the door. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as I activated it. I was now in a small red room. My eyes followed as I looked up into a dark ceiling and locked cold in their tracks when I saw a hanging red brick with what appeared to be a sign with Red Clover's face on it. This time he was hanging by a noose, motionless and completely alienated from everything around him. I looked behind me and saw a blue mat with signs hanging above it. One of the signs read, "Barbie," and had an arrow pointing down at the mat. The other sign next to it read, "I can't take how bored I am now anymore." I stared at the bed that was in the room. With all that this room was trying to tell me, I wondered jokingly, what if this bed had a secret to tell me too? Suddenly, I realized that it did. Upon further inspection of the bed, I noticed that a piece of the floorboard from underneath of the bed had something in it. When I scrolled my pointer over to it, my screen read that it was a jukebox. It was almost like the bed was trying so hard to shield me from knowing what went on in this room. I also noticed a chest in the room too. I opened it and found the following objects: a bowl, 2 bones, an axe, and a music disc too, C41811. This seemed to explain a lot, but at the same time, it didn't explain much either. It seemed like this red clover had a dog. The bowl might be a water bowl, but what about the axe and the bones? Red Clover must have used the music disc. Could that have caused the strange and loud noise that I heard? And why was Red Clover's room locked behind an iron door, with no means for anybody inside the room to unlock?